During the invasion of Fortress Europe, the casualty figures sustained on Omaha Beach were terrifying. Approximately 2,500 US casualties were sustained, of which around 800 were killed in action, depending on which source you use. The ratio was said to be 1 in 19 would become a casualty. The youth of America waded ashore into the German defenders on the bluffs above them. But it was at Juno Beach, where the fighting Canadians landed, that the casualties were said to be 1 in 18. The fighting on Juno Beach resembled modern urban warfare in many respects, silencing fortified residential houses, clearing rooms, and bunker busting. So was this the more deadly beach? This is the story of Juno Beach and the brave sons of Canada.
When they come, I will stand my ground. Stand my ground.
On June 6, 1944, the 3rd Canadian Infantry Division and the 2nd Armoured Brigade were tasked with establishing a bridgehead on the beach codenamed Juno. This was an 8-kilometer long stretch of beach between Sword Beach to the east and Gold Beach to the west. Juno Beach was characterized by pockets of urban areas and small towns that hugged the coast. Courseulles-sur-Mer, a port town, was anchored to the Swells estuary. To the east was Bernier-sur-Mer, and this was connected to Saint-Aubin-sur-Mer. To the east again is Langrune-sur-Mer. Beater stands nests are located at each of these sites, with bunker positions, ring stands and tobrukes that house machine guns, field guns, and anti-armor weapon systems. Juno Beach was separated into Mike and Nan sectors, which in turn was separated into Nan Red, Nan White, and Nan Green. Mike's sector was separated into Mike Red and Mike Green. We are only going to look at the Nan sector. So let's look at the key differences between Juno and other beaches by looking at Widerstandsnest 27. This was a strong point connected by trenches that used houses and residential areas to enhance its lethality. The tobrukes would contain machine guns or mortars just like these along the sea wall. This is a really formidable position that even had tunnels to aid movement throughout the town. In this picture, you can see the trench system amongst ruined buildings. It looks more like a scene from Stalingrad than the D-Day beach invasion. So let's visit Nan Red sector. This stretch of Normandy coast is beautiful. I love visiting, and I think they have a perfect balance of catering for tourism and respectfully honouring the events of 1944. This gun emplacement is probably my favourite in Normandy because it tells us so much about the German defenders' mindset.
So this is WN27 behind me, and the really interesting thing is that there's no embrasure that faces out to sea. All of the firing ports are along the beach. And that's really important because these positions are interlocking, providing mutual supporting fires. If you had embrasures out to front, firing out to sea, you're going to hit the frontal armour of tanks, which isn't necessarily the best place to attack them. But what it also means is that you're open to naval gunfire and from fire support from the beach. This is a perfect example of how to provide flanking fire onto the beaches at Juno. So we're stood here at the seawall, Saint-Aubin-sur-Mer, and the first thing that will strike you is that this is far more urbanised, certainly, than places like Omaha Beach and Utah Beach, which really was really rural. And as soon as they got off the beaches, they were straight into those fields and into the countryside. And the defences were actually built up within the houses, so the houses became strong points themselves. There were trenches connecting these strong points together as well, and they just became like mini citadels that had to be cleared by the Canadians and the British forces on Sword Beach. Right behind me you can see the sea wall, which is probably 8 to 12 foot now, but on D-Day it would have actually been even bigger because the sand has built up here to quite a big extent. So this was a really heavily defended area with a sea wall that the Canadians would have to get over as well, and on top of that sea wall was a bird's nest of barbed wire which made it incredibly difficult to get off. So finding an exit from this beach was the first priority for those Canadians who landed here on D-Day. So the other consideration is that this is, a lot more urbanized than the other beaches, like I said. And as a result, that meant the Allies were really hesitant to try and bomb it with strategic air bombing and with a great deal of naval gunfire support. What that means is that there's a lack of suppressive fires on this beach, and so the Allies relied quite heavily on the DD tanks, the much vaunted amphibious assault tanks that could land on this beach to provide that fire support. But unfortunately, they'd be delayed in landing because of a sandbar 200-300 meters off the shore, which meant they couldn't actually land and support the tanks with their integral fires. As a result, a bit like Dieppe, it was a frontal assault onto these positions without the integral support of the tanks, without strategic bombing, and without a lot of naval gunfire. So the final point to talk about is the enemy themselves. So the Germans who were garrisoned here were the 700th and 16th Static Defence Division. Contrary to popular belief, they were actually well-trained troops. They weren't the old granddads that some people make them out to be, and they definitely weren't elite forces either, but they were specially trained for defensive operations and, in fact, coastal defensive operations. So it made them well-suited to be here.
A quick break to say we've reached 100,000 subscribers. You can support the channel for just the cost of a coffee by joining Patreon clubs such as the Guards Armoured Division, the Winston Club, the Anzacs, and the Filthy 13. Let's now go to Nan White sector and beat a Stand's Nest 28 at Bernier-sur-Mer. This is another one of those 50mm anti-tank guns that would fire down roads and along the beaches, targeting that flank armour of Allied tanks. You can see the dead and wounded Canadians sheltering behind this emplacement, the barrel still pointing along the beach here. German prisoners, perhaps even the crew of this gun, are sat on the beach with Canadian wounded behind them. This was the scene of some truly ferocious fighting. The enemy fortifications on Nan White sector had been barely dented by the preliminary bombardment. The DD tanks were supposed to swim in ahead of the infantry to diminish the German resistance, but they were forced to land after them due to tides, waves, and the sandbank offshore. When the Queen's Own Rifles Regiment stormed the beaches, they received the worst battering of any Canadian unit on D-Day. Charlie Martin, who was the company sergeant major of A Company, described the landing in his book, Battle Diary. The moment the ramp came down, heavy machine gun fire broke out from somewhere behind the seawall. Mortars were dropping all over the beach. B Company landed directly in front of an enemy pillbox, which inflicted 65 casualties within the first few minutes. The assault depended on the resolve and courage of the remaining men to race across the beach to the seawall with no cover in between. In a mad dash, 3 riflemen reached this pillbox. Using their grenades and stun guns and firing through the slits, they managed to silence the defenders within. Lieutenant Herbert, Lance Corporal Tessier, and Rifleman Chikos received medallic recognition for their attack on the main pillbox. The Queen's Own Rifles had the highest casualties among the Canadian regiments, with 143 killed, wounded, or captured right here on this beach.
Okay, this concrete emplacement behind me is what's known as a Tobruk, and some Tobruks had machine guns in the top and some of them had pintle mounts for a mortar. In this case, it was a machine gun. Now, there's a picture that shows the Canadians on this beach stood next to this Tobruk, and it just goes to highlight how much the sand levels have risen, because it's probably a good 6 to 8 foot higher now than it was back then. The other really interesting feature is that in the top of this Tobruk was a 1908 style machine gun, and this is a water-cooled machine gun that would have been seen on the front lines in World War I. Nevertheless, still a really deadly weapon system, which goes to show that not every machine gun on the D-Day beaches was an MG42. So as we walk along the beaches and we get towards Canada House, you can see another one of these concrete machine gun emplacements called a Tobruk. And these were dotted at regular intervals all the way along the beach, and they would have provided a withering weight of fire onto the beaches here. You can see that it's got an unimpeded field of view all the way down towards Canada House, and then all the way down towards WN28 just down there. This really is one of the best defended beaches in the D-Day sector. Right, you can see the Canadian flag there with the bunker at its base, and just behind that is the beach. So that's where we've just come from. And as the Canadians were fighting their way inland, you come to this field here, which looks like an empty plot. Now that empty plot is really important because it was the temporary cemetery location for the soldiers who died here in this area and on this beach. And we're going to go and take a look at that right now. So just to the right of that Norman building that was here on D-Day, we have this field, and this field was used as a temporary cemetery location for the Canadians who died on this beach, as we've already said. And this quote's the first time I've read it, but it's brilliant. It's one afternoon, my aunt came to get me to pick flowers in the garden. The remains of 7 or 8 Canadians were lying there rolled in blankets. And this is the field that became the temporary cemetery location.
We're now going to head to the port town of Courseulles at Nan Green. As you'd expect, the Germans had fortified the port, and it was bristling with some of the most powerful weapon systems. Unfortunately, many of the larger bunkers that were here have been destroyed.
But we're going to go underneath this long jetty at Courseulles just to have a look at the port area on the other side. And about an hour ago, there were people fishing off this pier right into this location here. Now this was one of the more heavily defended areas of Juno Beach, and as a result the Canadians used DD tanks from the 2nd Canadian Armoured Brigade to assault this section of the beach in much greater numbers than at other locations. Now this is the Mike Red and Nan Green sectors essentially, and to give you some example of just how fierce the fighting was here, the Royal Winnipeg Rifles, who landed right over there, basically, just trying to stay out of the wind, had only 1 officer and 26 men still standing from D Company's original 120 men.
It was the Regina Rifles who landed to the east of the estuary, and they were tasked with silencing Widerstandsnest 29 and its large guns. A Company Regina Rifles would have only 28 men left of its original 120 by the end of the day, but they had managed to knock out an 88mm pack gun and a machine gun that had been responsible for approximately 60 casualties. We're now going to walk to another gun emplacement, and this is another 50mm anti-tank gun, although a different variety to the ones we've seen so far. Although obsolete for its intended purpose as a tank gun, it had a range of up to 7 kilometers, so it'd certainly do some damage.
Behind me is a 50mm cannon, and it's very similar to the ones we've seen at the Widerstandsnest 27 and Widerstandsnest 28 further along Juno Beach. Now, this position has been hit on 3 occasions by tanks coming off this beach, and the first hole that I will show you is a really clean, looks like a 75mm diameter hole, and that was clearly from a armor-piercing projectile. The middle hole is much more of a blast from what looks like a high explosive shell.
We're now going to have a look at Widerstandsnest 29, which no longer exists, but had some of the bigger guns in this sector. This is an 88mm pack howitzer that was put out of action by the DD tanks that landed here on D-Day, and you can see the scarring around the embrasure. Now, this video is not designed to compare Omaha Beach and Juno Beach or to discredit the losses at any location. It was to highlight just how ferocious the fighting here was and how the type of fighting here differed to that at Omaha and Utah beaches. 1,204 Canadian and British casualties were sustained on this beach. 1 in 18 would become a casualty. And we've seen some of those locations where the worst fighting took place. Many of those who died were laid to rest right here at the Canadian Cemetery in Benny-Sur-Mer. And it's here that I laid a marker for one of our Patreon supporters, Susan Yu, and she wanted to pay her personal respects to the brave Canadians here. A special shout out to my new Patreon supporters, Darren Peng, Colin Hoversall, Chris Ridley and Susan Yu. Thank you so much for your support. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please remember to leave a like, leave me a comment and subscribe to the channel. Until next time. Now, a couple of people have asked about the Brentslinger top I'm wearing in some of these videos, and they've asked where they can get their hands on it. Reaper17 is the store that I use, so visit their website, which you can find in the description, to get your hands on this top and others just like it. I don't really promote brands on this channel, but I make an exception for this brand. They are veteran owned and veteran operated. All the links you need are in the description below.